Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we were in Ezekiel 21, 22, and 23. I hope you're able to read ahead because there's a really good law enforcement takeaway in this one. But let's start. And I'm going to jump right into chapter 22. If you want to see what a city without law enforcement looks like, read chapter 22 of the description of Jerusalem. And you'll see what a lawless system or a lawless city looks like. I wish everyone in our country could see and understand this. But chapter 22, verse 7, it gives a list of sins that are being committed within the city. And there's no law enforcement there to stop any of this. It talks about just the abominations that the Israelites are committing. Talks over and over again about the bloodshed and just the murders and the killings, the disrespect for father and mothers, which leads to a total rebellion and a lack of respect for any authority, period. I mean, when you start with a kid who disrespects their mother and father, they will not have respect for any authority figure at all. So authority is completely out the window. The oppression that they are putting on the aliens and the mistreatment of widows and orphans, the selfish, evil behavior that abounds in Jerusalem is just unbelievable. But this list is a sins committed against human beings. And a lot of our police departments, we call that crimes against persons. But if you go to verse 8, it talks about crimes against God. And then verses 10 and 11 talks about the sexual immorality of the city, from homosexuality to incest to rape to adultery, all these things that violate the law of God. Then in chapter 12, it says they completely forgot about God. They just basically become agnostic. They don't care anything about God. I mean, they've known him and they just put him out. They turn their backs on him and they don't want to have anything to do with him. And then I want to read verse 29 and 30 because this is our law enforcement takeaway. Verse 29, the people of the land have practiced oppression and committed robbery. They have wronged the poor and the needy, and they have oppressed the sojourner, who is the traveler, without justice. There's no justice in the whole city. Verse 30, God says something really important here. He says, I searched for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand in the gap before me for the land, so that I would not destroy it. But I found no one. God is looking for a man or a woman to stand in the gap before him and for the land. He wants someone to uphold justice, someone who is righteous, who will tell these people to stop doing what they're doing. To me, he's looking for somebody with the heart and the commitment of a modern day law enforcement officer. Someone who does the right thing, who just seeks righteousness. But he's just not talking about just the physical, throwing on a badge and going into the city and arresting people who are doing bad things. He's also talking about spiritually. Who's going to stand in the gap spiritually and tell them, hey, not just what you're doing is wrong, but it's wrong because it's a violation of God's law, and point them to God. It's kind of a two-step process. You got to tell them what they're doing is wrong, but you got to tell them why it's wrong. And it's all about God and God's image bearers, and being image bearers that follow through with God's rule. And his rule is doing what he tells us to. He's the Father. I have a rule over my house. I'm the father, and I have children, and they know that sometimes they'll do things. Maybe it's not a written down law, but it's Dad's rule. And if you're going to live under Dad's roof, you got to follow dad's rules. Same thing here, man. They got to follow the father's rules. And somebody needs to tell them what the father's rules are, as well as breaking up the fights and doing law enforcement duties. But anyway, standing in the gap is so similar to standing the thin blue line, you know, keeping evil and chaos from encroaching and infecting the city. I don't think our communities realize that if law enforcement steps off the thin blue line and lets chaos come on in, what it's going to be like, because it won't be pretty. Anyway, we're spiritual warriors for God, cleverly disguised as law enforcement officers. We're the set apart ones, the called ones for law enforcement, for God's justice. You know, this goes to, it's all His, and He's intimately concerned about it. So anyway, a good law enforcement takeaway. Man, tomorrow, okay, you're just going to have to look at the last page, because it's another one of those days where there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, there's 5 different jumping from book to book, but there's like 8 parts of 8 chapters. Parts. And what I mean by that, 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 1. Just 1. Then 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 13 through 16. Just 3 verses. Then Jeremiah 39, verse 1. Then chapter 52, verse 4. Then we jump to Ezekiel and we read a whole chapter. We read Ezekiel 24, go back to Jeremiah, and we'll finish up with 21, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 9. Then jump over 10 chapters to chapter 33, and we'll read verses 1 through 44. Read ahead, come back here, and let's see what law enforcement takeaways we can glean from this. But until then, you guys be safe.